So I'm going to start this in English, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce my friend and longtime co-worker, Professor Stephen Hartman. Stephen is no stranger to Hortman. He's been here a number of times, but never in his current incarnation, which as the founding executive director of the British Sustainability Science Coalition. And I don't want to take up much of Stephen's time, but I've been following this work that Stephen has been carrying out for many years now. And I'm extremely happy, not only for Sweden and for the coalition, but also for me, that he managed to pull things together. But he is now going to tell us what he and his colleagues have achieved. So, Stephen.
Okay, thanks, Thor. Thanks for coming out, and it's really great to be back here at Meeheim and here at Hartman. It's maybe my third or fourth time here, and I'm going to give you an idea of what the Bridges Coalition is in this talk, and I want to begin by foregrounding what's new about it. We have any number of sustainability programs. This is a global program. It's a UNESCO program anchored in a UNESCO International Science Program. But it brings some new things to the table. And I think the kinds of things it brings to the table go back in many ways to the origins of the discussions when I first began coming to Iceland. And I first visited here, I believe it was in 2011 the first time. We had a symposium here when an Icelandic national group joined a Nordic network for interdisciplinary environmental studies that had been formed with the other Nordic countries. And we had a very successful and exciting symposium that foregrounded exactly how the arts and the humanities and the social sciences could be contributing to sustainability science. And I don't think fundamentally that need has changed. What has changed is our sense of the urgency of why that's important, as well as our sense of how that can happen in practice. And I think some of the issues that we're still grappling with were articulated nicely by one of our Icelandic colleagues, and I'm going to play a clip from an interview I did with him at the time, a number of years back. And these remain central, but I think our tools for dealing with them are better now. In many ways, I believe the Bridges Coalition began in Iceland. And I feel that its future is tied to a large extent with the exciting work and the exciting possibilities coming out of Icelandic researcher and community collaborations. And so I'm going to be trying to highlight some of those today because I think that's the next important step for the coalition, after I give you a better sense of what the coalition is and what it's all about. So to begin with, I'd like to maybe listen to a few minutes from Gisli Pálsson, highlighting, I think, what are some of the principal challenges we were facing when I interviewed him a few years ago, but I think these remain central, and this helps to set the agenda, I think, for what Bridges is trying to do.
We often say we need to do this or that. We need to deal with the Anthropocene to fix the climate problem and pollution and the rest of it. And it's true. We need to do something, but that we needs to be qualified. And there's a north-south dimension, for instance. At places like Rio and Copenhagen, the international forums for these issues, it always becomes clear that the North and the South do not have the same interests. And the North has colonized and plundered, and the South feels like a victim in a context of why, people say, would we bother, or why would we share the concerns and interests of the North? And then there are gender issues, and there are free people and slaves. There are more slaves on the planet than ever before in human history, and there are migratory workers without subject rule or citizenship, and the world economy needs them, and they're not planted right. So a democratic framework and a condition of trust and solidarity is obviously something very difficult to handle and achieve. But we better face the hurdles and the tensions within the we. Otherwise, we're stuck in an empty discourse on humans need to do this or that. Science.
I'm going to jump beyond that now and just emphasize that what Gisli goes on in the rest of that section to explain is how, for instance, the humanities, how the arts, and also communities themselves, which represent a really deep well of knowledge that's many generations old, that's passed on from generation about living in places. What are the challenges, the environmental and social challenges of living in places that from generation to generation, communities of people have to come to terms with and have to find viable ways forward if the community is going to be able to survive. And Iceland's been doing that successfully for well over 1,000 years. And I think that a lot of the work that has been getting pulled together, taking a look at how communities have responded to resilience crises and to other kinds of challenges that are faced for social and environmental factors that are intertwined is an important part of the story of bridges, and why bridges, I think, came about in a Nordic context, because these issues were being dealt with in a number of research groups around the country already in very interesting ways well over a decade ago. And so what I can tell you about bridges is that in around 2015, when the Paris Agreement was being formalized, when the Sustainable Development Goals were being formalized, and the international community and all the nations of the world were agreeing to these agreements with the Paris Agreement, Agenda 2030, and the Sustainable Development Goals, UNESCO started a project meant to take a look at the state of sustainability science as a field. And they wanted to know, how can this field help support member states to meet their commitments according to these big agreements? And by doing that, they took a look back at the past 15 years or so of sustainability science. They took stock of how the field had been established, how it had developed, and what it needed to do to more effectively be able to support these national obligations. And among the outputs of that was these set of guidelines, which came out really in the beginning of 2018 on sustainability science and research and education. I'll tell you in a couple of minutes more about what was new in these guidelines from, let's say, the first iteration of sustainability science. The partners that drove this process coming out of that, the new process to sort of establish something that could meet policy from the bottom up, were three partners. They were UNESCO, they were SITCH, which is the International Council for Philosophy and Human Sciences, and they were the Humanities for the Environment Global Network of Observatories, one of which is based here in Iceland at Stephenson Arctic Institute in the north, but which really has a circumpolar sort of ambit going from Alaska through Canada, through Greenland and Iceland and the Faroe Islands and into Scandinavia. The Circumpolar Observatory was one of the three partners, together with UNESCO and SIPSH, which decided, okay, if there are going to be these policy guidelines that are meant to help states address how do we actually effectively make a difference in sustainability challenges, we need something that can be brought from the ground up and bridge and meet that ambition in the middle. So UNESCO's approach to this is to work through their national commissions, their national committees for UNESCO, and then to have dialogues with the government about how the governments in different national contexts can support sustainability efforts. Bridges is about, okay, how do we work with communities, including knowledge and academic communities that have been a bit outside of the mainstream of sustainability science, like the humanities, like the arts, like educational sciences and qualitative social sciences. What we did then, these partners came together and put together 4 workshops in 2019 and 2020. Here's a workshop, the second one of these. The first was in Portugal, the second one was at UNESCO headquarters in Paris, the third one was in Sigtuna in Sweden, and then the fourth one was online because the pandemic had hit by then. But it was sponsored by the University of Cappadocia in Turkey. And this was the second workshop, and you see an Icelander here telling us about the North Atlantic Biocultural Organization, which has been extremely active throughout the North Atlantic, and particularly active working in archaeology, geosciences, geography, anthropology, environmental history, and other related areas, especially in Iceland, and has been exceptionally productive. And so Adolf Friedrichsen from FSE here is giving a presentation on the approaches that were being taken in the NABO network that he felt, and I think the people in the room agreed, were successful ways of collaborating that maybe Bridges, if it was going to form, should take a look at what they had done successfully. So already the Icelandic component of Bridges was very, very present from the beginning. And so these are just some snapshots from that second meeting. It's sort of a final picture with most, not all of the people who were there, from many different countries. And what we had was, over these 4 workshops, between 40 and 50 institutions and organizations from around the world that joined to together find a vision for what needed to be added to the sustainability landscape that wasn't there right now. And among those was an indigenous community from Colombia, was a trust called Tairona Heritage Trust. These are the Kogi from Colombia, and they are a full member of the Bridges Coalition too. So the coalition is interesting in that it both involves academic institutions and NGOs and indigenous communities and networks and programs in addition to sort of institutes. Because these are the different kinds of actors in society that we need to have talking with one another across the table, working across sectors, looking to make a difference on the ground in communities as they're lived in, not in an ivory tower that's simply just an academic exercise. So Bridges' name comes from this idea of bridging resilience in defense of global and environmental environments and societies. This was our mandate, this was our mission. And what we really wanted to be doing was finding a way of bringing humanities, the arts, social sciences into mainstream sustainability science in ways they had not been previously. And that really is the mandate, together with working with local communities as partners, as equally important contributors to knowledge co-production and co-production for solutions. So that is the mandate of Bridges, and that's what was identified in those guidelines for sustainability science that I showed you as the output document before from that previous project. That was identified already as an ambition, as an important goal. How that was going to be realized was another question. And that's what Bridges is working to do, to operationalize those goals. So from one of the workshops, here's Gudmundur Halldórsson, the then Dean of Humanities at the University of Iceland, talking about what he saw as an important part of what Bridges would have to be and try to do.
Yeah, the reason why I am here is that I'm the Dean of the School of Humanities at the University of Iceland, and I feel that sustainable development goals are becoming more and more kind of guiding light in research. And I feel humanities have been a little bit left out, or left themselves out, or not being able to understand and kind of frame the research in these concepts that guide this research. So I think it's extremely important, both for research in humanities, that we participate in this project, but also for the project that we do participate, because sustainable development is about people, about humanity, about our place in the world. And if we don't study culture in this respect, there's no way that these changes that have to happen are going to happen. So for me, it is really important for humanities to be part of this. Then we have to change our mindset, how we think about research, but also we have to change how these research is done.
Okay, and I'm just going to play you a couple more sound bites from a couple of the other contributors who were part of this. This is the director of the Future Earth Global Hub in Paris. Future Earth is a global network started originally within the UN system with different UN agencies like UNESCO, like the International Science Council, like the World Health Organization, I believe, and UNEP, as founding custodial sort of partners of this global sustainability organization. What they lacked, however, was engagement of the arts and the humanities, and sometimes the qualitative social sciences. So what Bridges was trying to bring was a complement to what they were already doing, but not so successfully in those areas. So here's what Sandrine has to say about that.
We talked about a lot about humanities. It's clearly a gap. There is also probably a gap in really understanding what is sustainability science and how to communicate to decision makers and citizens generally speaking. So there is also a clear program of communication and within the science community as well. Education and training is probably very important, especially to foster interdisciplinary work and work with societal actors. We must rely on our strengths and collaborate more and put our resources in common and our projects in common. I think we really need to avoid to add another layer, but really join forces and try to align more our initiatives.
And this is why Bridges is in fact a coalition. So what, of course, she's saying is that we have these structures already that are doing this, but there are huge gaps. And what Bridges is trying to do is to help fill a number of those gaps. Here's another vision from the director of the French National Research Institute for Development, giving his sense of how this aligns with the development agenda and the importance of connecting with the global south. I think
the good thing of this coalition is to have on board, southern, countries on board, but also, national research institutions from southern countries, from developing countries, from less developed countries. Otherwise, we will miss, key issue on sustainability science, because there are plenty of solutions from the south.
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'm going to skip over, in the interest of time, because we got started a little bit late. I'll skip over a couple more of these clips that I was going to play for you, and I maybe end with this one from the Director of Science from the International Science Council, Mathieu Denis, who's still working very closely with us, and they've come on board as a new custodial partner together with UNESCO, together with the International Council for Philosophy and Human Sciences and Humanities for the Environment, as being core partners of Bridges.
Making a tangible contribution is looking at case studies of experiences that you've gathered in your own organizations of how it is done, what result it has led to, how is it qualitatively different, probably for more top-down approaches that has been used elsewhere. All these things, this breadth of experience, I think perhaps could be captured in terms of case studies for a training scheme, and of course then we can build on that. If we could develop something that then has a sort of UNESCO certification attached to it, of course it could be a very powerful scheme.
And one of the things that Matthew ends with there is this idea of a UNESCO certification scheme. a little bit like the World Heritage list and so forth. So one of the things that Bridges, now that it has been approved, and it has been approved, we have 45 approximately charter members of Bridges, which are institutions and organizations and in some cases formalized networks. 3 of them are based in Iceland. So out of the 45 internationally, there's a really strong presence already of Icelandic actors in the collaboration, such as the University of Iceland, such as the Stephenson Arctic Institute. Beyond that, what we're working to do is to begin to both map successful integrated approaches to sustainability that we're calling humanities-driven and humanity-driven. That are successful collaborations in communities, in environments, some of which are on the front lines of environmental change, some of which actually are under more threat than others. And increasingly, we're working to involve more and more Global South and sort of Asia-Pacific collaborators. We have some already, but we need to grow there. We need to expand there. And 2 years ago, here's like I don't expect, this is just to give you an indication, the list on the right, what countries are involved. But it's too small really to read. So, but those are sort of the founding members of Bridges, the charter members of the coalition, and it's growing. We expect this number maybe to double in the next 2 years. We are now have a statutory role as the Sustainability Science Coalition of the Management of Social Transformations Program, which is one of UNESCO's international science programs, and the only one based completely in the social and human sciences. We have now 5 global hubs, and when we were approved by the MOST program to be the humanities-driven sustainability science coalition of the MOST program 2 years ago, we shortly after that had our first General Assembly. We set in motion a transitional period whereby we would begin to take proposals for basing hubs at different global sites around the world that would then become the sort of implementation nodes of the program. So each hub provides implementation capacity to programmatically move forward the Bridges agenda in a variety of ways. Right now, these are Arizona State University's Global Futures Laboratory. They are the University of Wales, Trinity St. David, the Club of Rome, which is not an academic institution, but which includes academics, which includes former heads of state, which includes leaders in industry and in technology. It's an interesting cross-section that punches way above its weight because it is such an interesting collection of people from different walks of life and different sectors. And then we have Princeton University together with CUNY, the City University of New York, which together sponsor a hub focused on the past, looking at how we learn from past cases of resilience or not, or failing to be resilient, and apply that to present day challenges. And finally, the University of Pretoria is our 5th hub. However, what I will mention is that, and then these are just some snapshots of, these hubs began launching, the first one a year ago, and 4 of them have launched in the last sort of 6 to 7 months. So they're all up and running now. This is some shots from Arizona State University's launch. These are some shots from the University of Wales launch a few weeks later after that. The first one was from the University of Pretoria's launch. What I can say is that these 5 hubs are not enough. We know that we need to expand those 5 to at least 5 more. And right now we're having very, very advanced discussions with the University of Cologne in Europe, with the Technical University of Kenya for potentially an East African hub, with the South American Institute for Resilience and Sustainability Studies in Montevideo and in Uruguay, and with the International Council for the International Council for Human Sciences in Byblos, Lebanon, which is located at a World Heritage Site and which is a UNESCO center already. And these 4, I would say we have advancing and/or advanced discussions about adding new hubs. We're in discussion with potential hubs that could join the network of hubs in Asia. And what I really feel is that it makes no sense that we don't have a Nordic hub yet. We don't have a Nordic hub yet. It makes no sense because it began in the Nordic countries. The entire wellspring that brought about this collaboration began in the Nordic countries, began out of a Nordic network with especially strong contributions from Sweden and Iceland. And the fact that we don't have a hub yet in Iceland is a bit bewildering to me, but I think it also flags up a really important opportunity for us to be thinking about how can we align, for instance, this initiative with Sustainable Iceland. And because sustainable, I mean, these issues are already being dealt with at the sort of government level, and they're obviously the very fact that the PM came here today and did a workshop and is going around the country having these workshops about how you can mobilize communities and inspire more productive and constructive collaboration with communities and involving communities shows that they're already doing this. And so how can we align those kinds of interests with also the academic and community stakeholder interests of Bridges, and then use this to amplify what's being done at the national level through UNESCO, through UN agencies, which is where we're doing a lot of our work increasingly now. Bridges has, I'll take you just through a handful of slides that I'll begin to wrap up then. Bridges has been extremely active in the last year, working with the Earth League in New York during Climate Week last year on identifying the 10 must-have targets and the must-do actions for a thriving tomorrow, for a transition that will make a difference in the future and be more sustainable. We've worked with SISH, the International Center for Human Sciences in Byblos, on the first Environmental Humanities Forum in the Middle East ever. And there was an outcome document that we then took the following week to COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. And that was the basis for one of 3 different events that Bridges organized in Sharm el-Sheikh. The first of which was with UNESCO in the UNESCO Pavilion, focused on introducing what Bridges is, together with and led by Gabriela Ramos, the Assistant Director General for Social and Human Sciences at UNESCO, who is in fact the chair of the Governing Council of Bridges, now that it's launching, the permanent Governing Council is launching this summer. And we had a really interesting project that Thori and some of the people from the center here were involved in called Folgo, where we were looking at the underlying issues of global warming and climate change, what was driving them, and how the arts in particular and the cultural sector could help to respond by working together at territorial and local levels to sort of enhance understanding of these challenges. In the case of Portugal, it's wildfires. In the case of Hornafjordur, it's melting glaciers, among other things. And we took this sort of fire and ice theme and worked with it and had a really interesting series of exchanges between Portugal and Iceland. And we took the outcome case of one of these to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt too and presented that. And then we also have worked with partners like People and Planet, who've done a European report on youth and climate change, with the Turn It Around project, which is actually looking at art and youth and engagement through art to give greater sense of agency and a greater sense of what young people can do to make a difference in dealing with the challenges of climate change. And a couple of other projects that were all part of this event that we had at Sharm el-Sheikh. From there, we went on to a series of workshops in South Africa where we began to help prepare the possibility for a new South African or South American hub for Bridges. And then this year, at the beginning of this year, we reached, as part of the Learning Planet Festival, the Learning Planet Festival reached 60,000 registered participants this year. And we organized 7 sessions in that, together with the Club of Rome, one of our hub partners, together with UNESCO, who's also done a regional report in the Middle East and the Arab region about youth-led action for climate change, and together with one of our hubs, the Wales hub, looking at better understanding how we can understand the language of nature, and moving beyond a strictly anthropocentric viewpoint of everything. We highlighted one of the cases of the Kogi. The Kogi now, as a result of, I think, being one of the first endorsed bridges projects, has been successful in getting major philanthropic funding to be carrying out a project where they can actually be teaching mainstream scientists their approach to revitalization of a territory through revitalization of its waters, through an indigenous science approach. That's one of the bridges projects. We had a future looking session about imagining a scenario where we had actually met all of the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, and we were looking back from 2050, and so we had an imaginative exercise. What did we do right that enabled that to happen? So these kinds of positive rather than these sort of negatively loaded and despairing kind of approaches to future challenges can sometimes be liberating and empowering in their own right. And that was the basis of one workshop we did at the Learning Planet Festival. We worked with our friends in Philadelphia at the Penn Program in Environmental Humanities on their My Climate Story project. It was hugely successful, which is crowdsourcing stories from individuals all over the world about how climate change is personally affecting them or their families. And these are being archived in a database and made available in open source ways. We're working together with Future Earth on a Pathways Forum, with the World Academy of Art and Science on future education for human security and the ties with climate change and sustainability there. So all of this is what's happened in the last year. And I'm going to wind down just by saying 2 weeks ago, we had, now that we're a statutory element within the Management of Social Transformations program, within this UNESCO Science program, we have the statutory reporting obligation to say, here's what we're doing, here's what we've done, and here's what we're going to do next. So we had that reporting, and we received very strong support from all of the member nations of most. There are dozens of member nations in the Management of Social Transformations intergovernmental program. And we had a side event, and you can see the last one of the day here was devoted to, or actually, not the last one. Oh, it doesn't show up on there, but we had an event wholly given over to the Bridges Coalition. And so this was the first General Assembly of the most Intergovernmental Council at which we had to actually report. And that went very successfully. This is in one of the big rooms at UNESCO where that was taking place and where the forum was taking place that we participated in. And this took place over a few days. So we're poised now to be moving forward. We're going to be going to Japan in August and beginning to initiate a mapping project where we can provide proof of concept by looking at community-embedded projects that are successfully bringing arts, humanities, community members, social sciences, all together in co-produced sustainability projects. And we're going to begin that process this year with the ambition of producing our first report on that, I hope in time for the UN Summit for the Future in New York in September 2024. Our goal is to build robust and transformative communities of knowledge, purpose, and action. We feel that Iceland has a tremendous amount, that it has already contributed to this, and we'd like to see that formalized by seeing a hub based in Iceland, perhaps at the University of Iceland, perhaps with the Institute for Research Centers, and a very obvious place where part of that anchoring could take place would be right here at Nehammer, and perhaps with some of the other research institutes, in the north, in Mývatn, the new one that's being started there, in Egilsstaðir, maybe in Strandir. But we're in discussions now with the university and hopeful that we're actually going to be able to formalize a hub here, which I think would bring new capacities and a lot of added value, both to the Icelandic academic community collaborations, both to the University of Iceland, but also I think to these crucial community research hubs that are part of the Institute for Research Centers. So I'm going to end there. Just to give you an idea what Bridges is all about, we have an excellent opportunity to amplify things coming out of small communities at international level through the UN system. And we want to take advantage of that. So we look forward to collaborating more with our Icelandic colleagues and seeing how we can actually make cases better known that are happening on the ground here, that unite culture, science, art, history, philosophy, and then life in places outside of the academic sphere, places like Hartman and the Hornafjordur region. So we hope we'll have the opportunity to be doing much more together with people here. Thank you. Okay. I'm not sure what the format is.
Well, Thorri, he's ran over to the Hartman where
The PM is,
Prime Minister
yeah,
will
yeah,
be.
yeah,
Hopefully
You have a
get
little
lost on the way
competition
from
here,
the
so.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess if Thorri was here, he would ask us if we have any questions.
Mhm. And if you do, I'd be really happy to answer one or two.
Well, maybe I have sort of a question, like, if I understand correctly, it's a network mostly about amplifying, I guess, research and community projects internationally.
Yes.
And
And providing guidance to policymakers
okay.
because these kinds of projects have sometimes fallen out of the mainstream of the science policy interface.
Yes.
They're not seen. So it's both amplifying them, but then also saying, what can we use in formulating new policies from what the takeaways from these kinds of projects.
So it's more about communicating to, I guess, like, administratively and academically than to the public.
It has different sort of points. So advocacy in different directions is important. So one of the forms of advocacy is making the knowledge that's coming out of these projects better known to policymakers to whom it may otherwise be invisible. But also what we're interested in doing too is finding ways to seed new partnerships with the public. And there I think the public is very, very central. And how the public can be involved. So how do we stimulate new projects? How do we find support for new projects that will stimulate collaboration with the public, different members of the public, that otherwise isn't getting done? So I think in that way, it goes the other direction too, trying to stimulate new projects.
I see.
I just hope that we will see a hub
Yeah.
in Iceland.
Yes.
I hope so too. I hope so too. I mean, I had very encouraging discussions yesterday in Reykjavik at the university. And I think already what is being acknowledged on both sides is that, like Hartman, this research center, and others like it around the country, this is where the front line and the sort of groundbreaking work is taking place. And this is probably the best place to be beginning if one wants to think about establishing a hub.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, you said there were 3 from Iceland, right?
Yeah.
So it's the university, and I was on the list.
Yeah. So it's the university, and it's Stephenson Arctic Institute, and then it's actually the observatory. So the observatory in Humanities for the Environment, which is hosted by Stephenson Arctic Institute, but is separate from it. That's one of the founding partners. But we also have through FSE and their role in the NABO network. In Reykjavik, we have an important partner there who, FSE is not itself one of the member institutes, but in its role as a sort of at the center of NABO, it is. And so the NABO organization is there, and I think they have their strongest anchoring probably in Iceland, and maybe in the United States and the UK. Those 3 countries have very strong sort of nodes within NABO. Mm-hmm. So. Huh?
Yeah, everyone are away.
Yeah, everyone went to work.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, we're doing it online and we're archiving it too, so it's, yeah. But so I think that it's promising that we might be seeing some developments here, and I'm very encouraged by the attitude of the people that I was able to talk to yesterday, who I think are in a position maybe to influence this kind of thing.
Exactly. To make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That's good.
yeah. So anyway, thanks very much everybody for turning
You
up,
too.
and yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So much.
Yeah. My pleasure. Okay. I guess that's it.